My name is Povh. I come from ACER. First, happy to be here to support this project. I think it's a very important one. The regulators and TSOs, as some of you may know, are currently working a lot on establishing a European integrated balancing market. And we will establish these markets in the next couple of years. And we are also developing European platforms for the functioning of these markets. These will be centralized platforms. Uros discussed before whether it's centralized or decentralized, what is better. So we will establish centralized platforms, and we are making design choices, so how this platform will function. And I'm happy to see that this project is nicely fitting this development. It does provide some experience, some testing on the ground, how to make certain choices, design choices about those platforms. So I'm happy to see some concrete results coming out of this project. So, as Uros explained before, there is a significant technological shift currently ongoing. We are somewhere in the beginning of this shift, but the shift is coming. It's going to be a huge one, and it's going to transform the electricity system in a fundamental way. And I hope that we are all aware that this is going to happen. It's going to be huge, and we have to prepare for it. So we are going to see a huge change in the way electricity is being produced, and also the way how it's being consumed and stored. These are three main drivers. Supporting underneath is also all the technological change in communication, ICT system, metering. All this will support this transformation of the system we are facing, and we as regulators and also legislators, we need to be ready. We need to keep pace, although sometimes it's hard to follow the legislative process and the governance process to follow the technological change on the field. I mean, some of us are afraid that we will be too slow to capture the process. Yeah, I don't see the slides on my screen, so I haven't had to turn around. So we want to yeah. So the way how we approach the problem is by establishing a common EU market where all technologies, all generation, demand, everything can compete at equal level playing field. So we want to establish a market where all forms of technologies can compete at level playing field. In general, we don't want to subsidize or give preference to any technologies. Technologies should be able to compete on a level playing field. But of course, it's difficult to make one single market where all technologies can compete for every, let's say, every benefit that they bring. So you will have a couple of different markets. Balancing market is one of those markets. We will have day-ahead market. We will have some ancillary services market, a DSO market. The challenge is how to enable all those markets to coexist, such that those who have the flexibility, prosumers, consumers who have the possibility to compete at those markets, those can arbitrage across those markets and deliver the added value of their assets to the market that offers them the highest compensation, the highest remuneration. And recently we just finished the discussions on the new clean energy package, where the role of consumers and prosumers have been greatly enhanced. I will just name a few main policy changes the Commission and the Member States and with our support have been made in the new package. So the new package throughout the directive and the regulation, it empowers the consumers, the active consumers, the distributed generators, the aggregators. The role of those players, new players in the market, is vastly strengthened. And throughout the legislative package, we have seen that what is important is to ensure that those new players or emerging players have non-discriminatory access to the market, level playing field, as what I explained before. There are specific design choices which we proposed, is that which will try to bring more consumers, more demand response to the market. Is that we want to at least ensure that consumption and active consumption is something different from supply. So if a consumer wants to offer services with the aggregator, which is not a supplier, that this should be enabled. So we want to separate aggregation and supply. Sometimes they are merged, but if a consumer wants to be separated, it can offer the services apart different from the supplier. It's one important element which is new in this new package. Access to data is also very important. The consumer needs to have the right to access its own data, and regularly and without unnecessary costs. We also want to preserve the balanced responsibility. Whatever the consumer does, it has to be balanced responsible. It is financially. It's an important element. Everybody needs to be balanced responsible. And when consumers are independent from the suppliers, there shouldn't be any consent required from the supplier, and it shouldn't be any undue payments to the supplier. But of course, the supplier may incur some costs in case consumer is active with the aggregator. This cost could be compensated to the supplier on specific conditions. So in general, this framework is very general. Member states will need to establish details at the local level, but at least some basic rights are given to the consumers which haven't existed before. So consumers have basically two choices: either they are more, let's say, passive. They are passively participating in the market, which means they are seeing the price on the market, then they react based on the price they see on the market. This is what we call passive participation, and passive participation is mainly in the day-ahead, long-term day-ahead intraday markets, where they react themselves. They don't wait for the signal from the aggregators, for example. And in sort of passive participation, we see that the day-ahead intraday markets have a very important role. And here we try to establish certain policy objectives by which we want to reduce all the price caps that exist in the market. In the new market, the prices will fluctuate a lot because of the renewables and the consumption and storage. The prices will most likely be often zero, but sometimes it will go to 10,000 euros or 100,000 euros. We need to be prepared for this, and we did not need to be worried if price at certain hours reach extreme values. We need to allow consumers to be active, to trade as close as possible to real time. But since we are talking here about the balancing market, I will just inform about the main policy objectives we have on the balancing market regarding the consumers or prosumers. So again, we are establishing integrated competitive market, and as Suresh mentioned before, the expectation is that the prices of ancillary services or demand response will go up. I would say I'm not so sure about this, because even though the inherent demand for the services will increase, we are also engaging in integrating those demands across Europe. So when you integrate the markets, the overall demand will decrease as a sum. And we are also trying to encourage TSOs to optimize their requirements. So when you instead of one TSO looking as an isolated TSO, we will start looking at TSOs in a regional or European sense, and they would need to optimize what they think they need to keep the system running. Several other policy goals is that we define products which allow consumers to compete or to place themselves to offer certain products. The marginal pricing, which means that the most expensive consumer which is needed on the market will determine the price for all other consumers. And I bolded two most important ones is that we need to allow aggregation across wider areas. And this is a problem because if you allow aggregation across wider networks, you will have problems in the networks. So we want to incentivize TSOs and DSOs to solve those problems in some other ways, such that we can allow aggregation across wider areas. We know there are problems, but at least if the consumers are not allowed to aggregate across wider areas, we lose a lot of potential to aggregate consumers. So we want to shorten the products. So currently we go for 15-minute products, but maybe in future we will even go for 5 minutes. That's it's going to be a fast market, very short, close to real-time market. And as I explained before, we want to separate aggregation and supply. So if a consumer wants to be independent from the supplier in terms of demand response, this needs to be allowed to the consumer. This is regarding the real-time market, the balancing energy market. So the real-time market is happening close to 1 hour before real-time. There's another market for consumers, which is the balancing capacity market. This is the market that usually happens maybe a day, a week, a month, or a year before, where they ensure capacity contract, which capacity contract is a security contract which ensures TSOs that they will always have sufficient services available. So this kind of market is also quite important. A lot of revenues for consumers will happen on this market. We also here want to optimize this market, but we want those procurements to be close to real time, which means that consumers will be able to see for the next day whether they will operate, and for the next day they will be able to see whether they can provide services, but they cannot do this one year ahead. So we want to shorten this procurement time frame so that more and more prosumers can be active and can compete in this capacity market. There are several other objectives and design choices. I will maybe emphasize that one important element, which is quite new and TSOs don't like, is that when TSOs settle the contract for capacity, they also want to fix the energy price. They want to fix both deals together. Now we want to separate these things. So when you settle the contract for capacity, that's one contract, but there is no fixing of energy price. The energy price should be defined 1 hour before real time. So those consumers which have a contract with TSOs for capacity, let's say a year contract, year ahead contract, or a month ahead, they should be able to define the energy price, the energy price bid up to real time, so that this energy price bid will reflect the current real-time status of the system. So if the system is short, if the energy is scarce, this consumer should be able to bid 10,000 euros, for example. So this kind of separation is important, because then all the risks, for example, of energy storage, that for example, energy storage can only be activated 3 times per day. So how the consumer or prosumer will manage this risk. So the first time he will be activated, he will maybe bid 100 euros. The second time a day, he will bid 1,000 euros, and the third time, because he only can be activated 3 times, he will bid very high price so that he will not be activated. So this kind of risks of consumers we want to keep at consumers, and TSOs should just separate the procurement of capacity and energy into separate markets. So that's broadly what I wanted to emphasize, is that we are establishing these markets. These markets are going to be European integrated markets. We hope we will attract 3 main benefits. One is when integrating, you get some synergies, because sometimes there is a shortage in one system, supply surplus in another system. we want to optimize TSOs to reduce requirements, to work as one at the regional level. But the third point is we want to enable consumers to participate more freely and more easily to these markets. That's the message I wanted to give you today, and yeah, thank you very much.